here's a second piece of magic, a second moment that was important out of that. Right after that experience, at age 24, a friend of mine called me up named Neil Marinello, and he was a counselor and teacher at this small school for delinquent boys where I was working as a teacher at the time. And it was actually my first teaching job I ever had. So Neil called me and said that one of his old professors from Harvard had come back from India recently and was on some sort of a new, unusual trip, and did I want to go meet him? And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. And so one Sunday afternoon, Neil came by, and I knew absolutely nothing about this, except that when I got in the car, I asked Neil, where are we going exactly? And he said, we're going over to Webster Lake, New Hampshire, and we're going to meet one of my old psychology professors at Harvard named Richard Alpert, and he's gone to India, and he's changed his name to Ram Dass. And I said, okay. Now at the time I knew nothing about yoga or meditation or anything like that. It was a completely foreign subject. I was an English major. I was interested in writing the great American novel. That was my thing. And so we went over to this beautiful estate that belonged to Ram Dass's father, and we went in, and here was the strangest scene I've ever seen in my life at the time. There was a whole bunch of people dressed up in Indian garments, saris and loose-fitting garments, and they all had beads on, and they rushed over to us with a bowl of fruit and flowers, and there was probably Ram Dass and about maybe half a dozen disciples, and then about maybe 5 or 6 of others of us that weren't connected with him in any way, but had just come to hang out with him. And so the dozen of us sat down there on the grass, and Ram Dass began talking, and he began talking for about 3 hours without any notes. And that just blew me away, because even with a class of junior high school juvenile delinquents, I had to have my notes organized when I walked into class. And so I saw this guy talking, kind of drawing words out of space, and I'd never seen anything quite like that. And so afterwards I went up and asked him, I said a couple of things. I said, first of all, where do you get that stuff? Where does that come from? And he said, well, I just kind of let it come through, and I sometimes look down at my picture of my guru, and that inspires me, and I talk again. And so that just seemed like the strangest thing I had ever heard. So I said to him, well, take a look at me. What would you suggest? I may never see you again in my life, and I don't know what all this stuff is about, but what would you suggest for me? And he said, well, I would suggest doing some breathing exercises. And I said, how do you mean? And he said, well, in India they might do some breathing exercises if they had a problem rather than maybe talking about it. And it's a different approach to growing. And that sounded very strange for me, but I said, okay, where would I learn about this? And he said, just be open and something will come to you. Okay. And so the next day I'm at the supermarket, and I was standing in line waiting to check out. And there to my left was a little kiosk of paperback books. And I saw one of them said, Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. And I came to that store all the time, and I'm absolutely certain I must have passed that kiosk 1,000 times, because it was not the kind of place where they put new books in there all the time. This was kind of a dingy little supermarket in rural New Hampshire. And so I picked up the book, and I looked at it. It was by a gentleman named Jess Stern. And I started leafing through it, and what amazed me was that it was a book of exercises, and one whole section of it was on breathing exercises. So in one day I go from never hearing of Ram Dass to never hearing of breathing exercises to having a book of breathing exercises in my hands. And that began to impress me, that that kind of manifestation could happen that easily. And so it made me realize that if I kept just making choices in favor of that open spiritual space inside me that I'd just kind of gotten on the line, then things would be different in my life. And here's what happened. I took the book home, and I started working my way through the activities, just one after the other. That was maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By about midnight, I'd gotten to the chapter on meditation. I'd gone all the way through the physical yoga. I'd gone all the way through all a dozen different pranayama exercises and things like that. And so I began to get into the meditation part, And all of a sudden, even after about 2 minutes of doing a very simple meditation, just kind of an om kind of meditation, I got into that same space that just before a few days I bashed my head on the ground to get. That same open, pure space. And it was right there all the time. I had it all the time. And that's one thing I want to tell you about stories too, is that inside your story is the essence of your genius. It's the essence of your transformational magic power that you have to give to other people. And I absolutely can say that with confidence because I've experienced that. And also, of course, now with 20,000 people that we worked with, we've seen a lot of other people experience it too. But just know that all of that is right there, right behind and inside your story, and can be accessed by you getting to know your story at deeper and deeper levels.